Welcome, everyone. PCI Media is so excited that you're joining us today. My name is Misha Brown. I'm the president of PCI Media, and I am joined today with someone who I adore, who is just a tremendous human being in the world and a great art maker and builder of people, David Gear. Welcome, David.
Hi, Misha. Thank you so much for that sweet introduction.
I could go on and on, but that's not the people
No.
came to hear us talk. So that's what we're going to do. So first of all, happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. Yeah, I see the flower theme. You were already referencing that I've got some red tulips going on behind me, and you've got some beautiful orchids on your side
Yes,
of the world.
but you're like in a room of passion. This, but that's what we're looking into.
Well, interestingly, this room is designed for spiritual recognition. And the reason I mention that is that I have a feeling that we're going to talk about love and we're also going to talk about spirituality. I
Yeah,
can feel it coming.
right. And aren't they so related? So let's get into it because we're here to talk about the power of love to make change. And, you know, both of us really understand art as a powerful conduit for love. And I thought maybe we could get started by telling origin stories. You know, we like stories at PCI Media. And sort of the origin of both of our connection with this idea of love and art as a powerful way to make change. And I've never heard this story from you. Um, so, sort of, what's the genesis of all of this for you, and how'd you get started?
Well, as you ask that question, I find myself immediately transported back to 1985. And the reason 1985 comes to mind is that I was just out of college. I'd had a couple of years working in India at a small college teaching. I'd gotten a master's degree, or most of a master's degree, in ethnomusicology. And I landed, on account of love, I should say, in San Francisco in 1985. And the love part was that it was my first boyfriend. And he lived in San Francisco. I'd been living in Honolulu going to grad school. And so, on account of love, I moved to where he lived. And, what that meant was that though I had been kind of circulating in other parts of the world where HIV hadn't arrived yet, that then I landed in San Francisco where HIV had definitely arrived.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I won't tell the super long version of this story because, as you can imagine, we would need a few days to work our way through all those details. But suffice it to say that I began to realize that art was incredibly powerful and that it was incredibly powerful in relation to HIV, and it was ennobling my life. It was ennobling the lives of people around me. And I could see that people who were living with HIV were making the best art of all.
Mm-hmm.
So in the midst of that, I started to come to some personal conclusions about how art making could contribute in other ways to other important things in the world, that it could change the world. And so it was in that context. And so, geez, I didn't even count up my numbers before getting on, but that was 15 years before the millennium, and we're now 22 years in. That's a lot of years.
A lot of
Uh,
years of love.
a lot of years of love that's been going on. But I'm curious about you, Misha. Where was it that the two ideas came together for you?
So interestingly enough, it for me was also in my around my undergraduate study time. And I have to say that when I began to study storytelling, which was really the art that I was into, um, I was already committed to love, right? Like just my early experiences in life, like growing up in a really traumatic childhood and just like seeing all the damage that coming at things from other orientations, other perspectives could do. I was already committed to love, full stop, as a way of being. And I had this wonderful professor, Sean Watson, and with her, I read 19th century American melodrama and Greek tragedies and all sorts of amazing and all like iconoclastic works in early 20th century American theater. And it was really interesting to explore like the hatefulness, there's no other word to describe it, that you see in traditional 19th century American melodrama that's all about preserving status quo that really marginalizes certain communities and keeps the structure in place, that now, we can all talk openly about how damaging, those structures are. And then you compare that with, like August Wilson or Alice Walker or, the artists that didn't shy away from the really difficult things, but were so loving to everyone, like even their most flawed characters in the way that they went about the work. And it was really at that time through exploring that work and, reflecting on my own life that I was really able to see, how those works really helped move American society forward. And I think that was really the beginning of my appreciation of those two things coming together.
Mm-hmm. I'm so interested to hear you talk about novelistic characters, knowing the work that you do that involves the Subito method and developing characters. Is it then kind of an origin story for you in the sense that it was the love of complex and maybe difficult characters that led you to want to work with complex and difficult characters within the method?
Well, I mean, those experiences for me, it was the seed. It's so funny that you mentioned that because Sean Watson would always say to me, you're gonna do your PhD in story. And I often think about the work that I'm doing now at PCI Media as that, like, life is my school sort of thing. And it was really the recognition of seeing the alchemy in characters and how, like, I remember the first time I read Ibsen's A Dollhouse. It was, just tiny little playbook, but the characters were so complex and it was just so powerful. And it was transformational for me as a human being and an artist. Yeah.
Honestly, I didn't know that theater was such an important part of your background. And I didn't mention it, but the main thing that I was paying attention to starting in 1985 was choreography. Was really interested in the dance world. I came out of a music background, but I kind of moved over into the dance world. And what I began to see was that people who worked, especially in the space between theater and dance, had a kind of a leg up. Ha ha ha. But
I see what you did there. Yes.
I didn't do it on purpose until I was already doing it. It's one of those. But the thing that they have then when they're working in between those two modes is the sense of the theater and the use of words and the building of character. And then also the movement that can so much amplify that. It brings to mind especially somebody whose work I've always appreciated, and that is Joe Good, who's a choreographer who works in the theater. And so he's as much a theater artist as he is a movement artist.
I don't know Joe Good. I'm going to have to learn up.
Look him up. Yeah. San Francisco based, but, international reputation.
Okay. So it's so interesting, right? Both of our origin stories, some interesting overlap. Interesting. So then, David, as you start moving into like your early experiences with love and art and change, right? Because this is the fascinating thing and why I wanted to talk to you today is that I think we both have these interesting experiences with being in a situation or situations, I should say, where there seem to be, and it seemed to be because I don't believe there are, like two schools of thought, right? Like you have to sort of be angry and riled up and, there's that whole emotion set of like anger, fear, retribution, like all of that. And then there's love, awe, all of those sorts of emotions. And there can often seem like there's this dichotomy between the two. And so how did you, in your early experiences, really, I don't know, like landing in love or choosing love as the path? I don't know what it was for you. What were your experiences like, and what reactions did you run up against? And I'm really curious.
Well, what your question immediately brings to mind is that period of the late 1980s and the different kinds of activism that were encouraged at that moment. And there were kind of two streams, and they pretty much line up with the two streams that you were just suggesting. Um, and I landed in one of them, which I'll explain in just a moment. And I kind of wish that I had been more in the other. So the prominent stream for activism, especially for people who were in the arts, was ACT UP, which was the angry stream for sure. Incredibly creative. I mean, just think of the actions and the graphics and all of the things associated with ACT UP that have honestly lasted. I still teach those things in my arts activism classes at UCLA, and the exhibitions and the book length projects and everything growing out of that period, and the documentaries that are proliferating at this moment have so much to do with what was going on with ACT UP, because it was such potent work. The other side of activism at that moment in the late 1980s was the Names Project AIDS Quilt.
Mm-hmm.
It was the place where familial love got expressed. And it's where we laid out on the mall in Washington, D.C., the symbols of love as a way to undo the stigma associated with HIV and all of the sort of governmentally sanctioned reasons for inaction. I landed in I landed in the Names Project AIDS Quilt tributary and got so much from it, and actually was involved in Washington, D.C. in various showings of the quilt, and felt the power of it, because on account of showing it at the mall and showing it just before Election Day on several different occasions, there was an impact. We could start to sort out like which politicians were with us and which ones were against us.
Yeah.
And which ones could feel, really feel in their hearts the broken love, the hurt, the pain of this, and could be counted on to do something. In retrospect, I wish I had been more involved with ACT UP.
Why do you say that?
Well, I have such huge respect for what ACT UP did in the early years, and still there are chapters of ACT UP still extant. And I think that it is a phenomenal organization, that it's produced phenomenal work, and it actually made a gigantic difference when it came to the release of drugs. I mean, Anthony Fauci, who we know so well now in the COVID era, was a key figure at the Centers for Disease Control, from the late 1980s. I don't know the exact year that he started working there, but ACT UP was kind of in a back and forth with him over the space of most of a decade. And he was somebody who listened, and he listened to the needs of people who were living with HIV. I also, just for clarity's sake, I feel the need to let anybody who's listening know that I am not living with HIV myself. I am a committed ally. And I think it's important to say that, not because I don't want to take on the stigma associated with HIV. In fact, I do. But it's because I want to be honest about that and recognize that I can't be a spokesperson for all people living with HIV, but I can be an ally. And it's something I am truly committed to doing.
David, I really love you. You're so amazing and just thoughtful and compassionate. It's so beautiful always to connect with you. So, okay, so I love this book. And if you haven't read it, David, or anyone who's listening, check it out. It's amazing. It's by this author, Adam Kahane. It's called Power and Love. And in this book, Adam really explores these two forces for change and talks about how his theory, he posits that social movements can't really last or make the impact that they could unless both forces are there. And power being the expression of the individual need or desire, and love being the force that continues to bring us all together, right? Like recognizing that like nobody gets out alone. and there's an interconnectedness that we can't escape. And hearing you describe, the two streams in, the early days of the HIV movement, it makes me think of that work, right? Where those two streams were there and how powerful it was that they were both present, and what would have been lost if one had been without the other.
You're bringing to mind something else that has been important to me over the years, the writing of Douglas Crimp, who is an art critic who was himself a member of ACT UP and played a role in all the design and graphic work that happened through ACT UP. He actually wrote a series of essays that changed over time his own perspective on being a part of the angry stream or the quiet mourning stream. And at the beginning, he was definitely allied with the need for militancy, for reasons that I understand, and I presume anybody who's listening would understand as well. He was very critical, actually, of the Names Project mourning stream, saying it was too soft, it was too weak, it wasn't clear in its demands. But over time, he came back around to looking at the two streams side by side, and he wrote a piece about mourning and militancy, suggesting we needed both.
Mm-hmm.
And both involve love, interestingly. I mean, mourning is about the loss of love on account of break or heartbreak or death. So, there's the mourning side of things, but there's also so much love inside militancy, that's when we do things that are hard for us because we care, and we care so much that we have to, and our angry words and our shouting and our determination come from love.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to realize that the two streams that we're talking about both kind of hold love as the root.
Yes.
Expressed in different ways.
Well, and this is, what I was meaning before when I was saying they seem to be separate, right? But they are all coming from a place that in many ways desires the same end, I think in lots of cases. But I do think, David, that we have to, especially when we think about change and art making, we have to really recognize the limitations of anger. We have to see how far it will get us and understand that it cannot take us all the way. I firmly believe this. Because what it doesn't do is it doesn't really provide the lubricant for coming together that we need, for the communion that we need, right? For sense making, for work collaboration to actually solve problems, to, it's a tricky balance. And I think, when I think about the work that we do at PCI Media and the commitment to love not lost as the core, it's the recognition of that, right? So it's not that we don't acknowledge the difficult thing. It's not that there are no angry words. It's not, that there aren't difficult conversations, but it really is understanding that there has to be a commitment to actual real love, which sometimes it's easy to stay angry, right? And let's take Fauci for an example. This is a great example. Even now, we're back here. I bet he's like deja vu, right? It can, at some point or in some way, we have to figure out when is the appropriate time for there to be the coming together to walk together in the solution. And, in every situation that's very different. And with every set of actors, it's very different. But just again, in my own life and what I have seen happen when people can really move past feeling always as an adversary, I think it can be really powerful.
Hmm. You know, I'm hearing the slogan, the love not lost slogan, and I don't really totally understand it yet. Do you mind if we linger on that for just a little bit?
Yeah.
Where did it come from, and what does it mean that, when it plays out at the level of like making a project? I know that the Mozambique project that you've been working on, you've described as a love not lost project.
Yeah. So Love Not Lost really came out of a lot of, interestingly enough, sustainable development work where climate change, like in the early days of talking about climate change, you can look at, and it is, climate change is this huge disaster, and there's really nothing great to say about it, or species, extinction, like all of these things are really hard and horrible and have serious repercussions for humanity and for all life on the planet. But how do we connect people best with a way forward? And it's to remind us all about our connection to these things and our love for ourselves and for all living things. And it's starting from the place of love instead of focusing exclusively on the loss, right? Like, how can we find the joy and the possibility and the promise and the things worth fighting for, right? And seeding the work in love, right? And it really is a powerful reframing, because when you begin the conversation from a place of love and possibility, from the beginning, you're talking about wonder, at the same time that you might be talking about obstacles, right? So they both live in the same space together from the beginning. And I just found it to be a really powerful reframing. I mean, we did a campaign with United Nations Environment Program called Wild for Life. And David, the entire campaign was about really stopping the killing of big game, the big five species, primarily in Africa, but there are consumer markets all over the world. And you can say to people like, this is horrible what you're doing, killing rhinoceros for their tusks, or pangolins, which I didn't even know about before we did this campaign. They're like the cutest little animals ever. But before having that conversation, it was really impactful to bring people into a space of connection and appreciation and wonder for these creatures. And so what we did was we designed these social media morphs where you could take a quiz and you could find out, are you team pangolin, or are you team tiger, or are you team whatever? And then you get a little Instagram morph where you kind of morph into the animal. And it's the portal in, right? So then when you find out what's happening to the pangolin, or you find out what's happening to the rhinoceros, there's already this sense of wonder and connection that is a lubricant, is the only way that I can think about it today, right? It eases us on the path to, to goodness, to better things. And so I think it's a really wonderful way of entering into a lot of the hard conversations that we've had to have and that we will have to have in the future.
I'm really interested in the way that you're describing this. Getting ready for having this conversation with you today, I didn't know where this was going to go. I didn't know, what direction you would want to take it and where it might lead to. But I got thinking this morning about liberation theology.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
hope this doesn't sound like it's going in a different direction, because it's not
No,
really.
it's not. Yeah, go ahead. Come on.
Well, I was brought up as a United Methodist, and I have nothing to do with that church now because it's a homophobic church. And, that pains me to say, because it's been so important to my family over, multiple generations, but I can't go anywhere near it because of that.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, what I remember from the lessons of the church, from literally the sermons from the pulpit as a kid, was that Christ was really radical, and
Mhm.
that he believed in the power of love and expressed it verbally in ways that got, taken down by the scribes of the day. And what led ultimately to the creation of this thing that we call liberation theology now, which is based on that radical nature of
Yes.
Jesus Christ
Yeah.
as a human being, and as the way he presented himself as an activist in the world. And the radical thing that it keeps coming back to ultimately is love. Loving
Yeah.
somebody you might not want to love, loving somebody who's different, loving somebody who's poor and indigent, loving somebody who has nothing to give you, so it's not a transaction.
Yes.
And this is all to say that for all that I said, those negative words about United Methodist theology in particular, because of the homophobic current debates that are going on within this particular church. Nonetheless, I have great respect for the messages that were being sent to me as a young person from the pulpit about love and about that kind of care. And it leads me to think about other people who work in the area of health, not the art side so much, though there's always art involved. But I'm thinking about Paul Farmer. Paul Farmer, the Harvard trained, now, health expert who works in difficult places, like in Haiti, for example. Um, his work is based on liberation theology. And
Mhm.
when you read his essays, he hearkens to it over and over again, and he puts it forward in a really strong and aggressive way because it is the root.
Yes.
If you believe in spiritual love, then you
Yeah.
want to do this work, and you want to do it in the best possible way, and you want to work in the space between love and compassion, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm so happy that you brought this up because there is, you know, I believe I agree with you, like not talking about a religious root, but definitely a spiritual root, a philosophical root. And I think, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, even to talk about Jesus, I mean, he didn't always say nice, fluffy things. I mean, radical love is radical. It presses and pushes on us. But what can't be denied is the undercurrent of intention, right? Like that's so clear. And I feel, when you look at the work of people or the art of people, even though they're the same thing, that are committed to this, you can really see this thread in their work. I mean, and I just am thinking back to Alice Walker again. And for The Color Purple, she took a lot of flack for that book because she was very honest, about the relationships between Black men and Black women and Black people and white people. But when you read the book, and I will say read the book, not watch the movie, because the movie alters some important things. But when you read the book, every character in that novel is loved by that writer. It's nobody's a throwaway, right? Which is very different, from this idea that somebody gets to be sacrificed, right? And to your point, schools of thinking like liberation theology are all about everybody everybody being able to partake of the abundance, right? Like everybody, coming into the circle of love. That's what I like to call it. Um, and it's something that I really think about a lot in our work, because there is usually this idea that there's like a beneficiary, like the audience is the beneficiary, and the rest of us are sort of over here making things for other people to like help them, enrich them, influence them. And I understand that framing, but it's not the way that I understand the work. I think that because we're all in the circle together, doing this work from a place of love changes all of us that are actors in this all of the time. And, I just think back to, the I Survived Ebola campaign, which was born in your garden. You remember that idea for that campaign? Yes, like millions of people learned how to protect themselves and their families and find treatment, and, you know, rates of stigma against people with Ebola were reduced. All of that great stuff happening for people in West Africa. But David, I'm a totally different person after that campaign. It changed me. I have relationships that I wouldn't have. I think different ways. I remember talking to someone that was working for UNICEF at the time after hearing one of the Ebola survivors come on the radio and tell their story. And he was like, I'm thinking completely differently about the way that I'm doing my work now. And it just, this power that it has to touch all of us, because we're all connected, is I love it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You make me think about so many things all at once. It's kind of a thought storm going on in my own head. I think I want to mention something about bell hooks.
Yes.
Bell hooks writes about love at every opportunity, pretty much. And I pulled out, because we were going to be talking about love. I got out my copy of All About Love. Here we are.
David, it's like we planned this, but we didn't plan this part.
We didn't plan this part. And it actually leads back to the concept of liberation theology that we've been addressing. At one point, she writes, imagine how different our lives would be if all the individuals who claim to be Christians or who claim to be religious were setting an example for everyone by being loving. It's like as simple as that,
Yeah.
And then, when it comes to the kind of project work that you're involved with and that I'm involved with, and which sometimes coincides, as a project is coinciding for us this week, when it comes to our work, if we can embed the intention of our work, the realization of our work, the efforts to touch and change with our work, with the feeling of love, we're bound to be way more effective.
Yeah.
I appreciate your bringing up the concept of love in relation to the Sabito method, because it would be very easy to turn the Sabito method into a formula. Like, all right, this is the character, the good character, and we're going to emulate that character. And here's the transitional character, and it's going to waffle back and forth, and we're going to land in the good, or oh no, maybe we'll land in the bad. It can start to seem like it's just formulaic, but really it's about getting attached, right?
Yes.
Feeling connected, caring, feeling compassionate and loving, and so if we embed that feeling of love within our work, it ends up not being just a kind of cold, calculated formula to change somebody's behavior, but instead it's about something that we want to shift in our community because we care.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think people can feel that. I think that's like the secret sauce, if I had to, is people can feel when they're invited to really connect. And they can also tell when they're being preached to and being condescended to. So yeah, it's a beautiful opportunity and honor to be able to like be an agent of love. And I will never disagree with anything that Bell Hooks has to say about being in love and working in love.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost as if she's the high priestess of love, which is not something you expect from a scholar, philosopher, academic, but she's so much more than that, of course.
Well, David, I think this is a wonderful way to close our conversation, which is to invite everyone to think of themselves, or maybe to reconsider that they can be an agent of love in whatever they're doing, like whatever work or whatever art. How can we ground it in love? As Bell Hooks says, imagine how much more effective we will be in everything that we're doing. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you later this week for some design workshops so we can make some loving art together.
Honestly, what you've set up in our conversation today is the perfect grounding for work that we're hoping to do later this week. We're working on a juvenile justice project that is a way to bring sexual health education into juvenile detention centers, but to try to do it from a place of love and care, as opposed to punitive or behavior change kind of approaches, which can feel so cold.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm loving that we've had this conversation now as the way to set up what will be a design workshop for us later this week.
David, thank you so much for joining me on Valentine's Day, Big My Date. I appreciate it.
Wonderful to spend time with you. Happy Valentine's Day to you and to anyone who's listening.
And what do I want to say? Check out the Art and Global Health Center. David's doing phenomenal work, the Sex Squad through Positive Eyes, and he's an incredible human being. And check us out on PCI Media. Always love your interest and support, pcimedia.org. And thank you for joining. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone.